The third pillar, the first pillar was the Eucharist and how important the Eucharist is as the starting point of our spiritual lives. Coming to Mass, receiving communion, coming and participating in even daily Mass. The second one was on spontaneous prayer. How we learn to incorporate into our everyday lives spontaneous prayer. Prayer when we're in those moments of need. And I'll refer you, I'm not going to give that whole homily again. You can watch it on YouTube. The third one, the third pillar, he says, is the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes describe, in a sense, the way that God relates to us and how we relate to God. The Beatitudes begins with the idea of being blessed, the idea of how do we love and how does that love come back to us. And he reminds us that love in God's terms is different than human everyday kinds of love. It's not just liking your car or thinking your house is really cool. It's not just that love which is emotions. It is called agape love. It's the Greek word for love. When the Bible wants to talk about God's love, it's called agape love. Agape love is a love which we find in encountering God. When we encounter God, we encounter that most profound, in a sense, deepest form of agape love. It is a love that doesn't do things expecting a return. It's probably the most beautiful characteristic of our Christian faith. And that is that God's love starts as a free gift. And that if we truly want to love, we have to learn how to love, not expecting anything in return. No conditions on that love, no expectations, merely that we love as a free gift. And that's the basis, and in a sense, that's the starting point for the Beatitudes. Because of course, the Beatitudes are describing how God is going to love us in the midst of our everyday lives. How God is going to love us regardless of where we are or what we're doing. God is going to love us. That's the promise of God. Now, of course, when we love, we have to understand that love has certain aspects to it. And that's why the Beatitudes are so powerful. We hear those Beatitudes. And I'll just read, this is the translations that he uses. Blessed are the humble-hearted. Blessed are the sorrowing. Blessed are the gentle-hearted. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for the will of God. Blessed are the forgiving and the merciful. Blessed are the pure of heart. Blessed are the peacemakers and reconcilers. Blessed are those persecuted for the will of God. Blessed are you when men insult you and hate you. Those are, in a sense, in groups. He places them in groups. And he begins with, blessed are the humble-hearted. Blessed are the humble. The humble-hearted, and this is, he describes this as a progression. The humble-hearted is someone who places the needs of others before our own needs. This isn't hating ourselves. This isn't somehow trying to be less than we are. Being humble-hearted is putting others' needs before our own needs. If you seek to invest in others, if you seek to build others up, you are practicing that humble-heartedness that Jesus describes. If you seek someone else's comfort before your own, you're practicing that humble-heartedness. Humble-heartedness is not about being a doormat. Jesus was very humble-hearted, and yet he could be very powerful when someone challenged him. Merely doing things for others is not enough. It's partly the presence that we have with others. Being humble-hearted is acknowledging that someone might need our presence far more than the actions that we need to do. Being humble-hearted is sometimes just sitting with someone that's sick. Just simply being there. How do we necessarily look for that deeper kind of humble-heartedness? Well, first we have to put aside all pride. Pride is always putting me first. It's always looking for my own comfort, my own well-being. And if we do that, we're constantly comparing ourselves to others, even spiritually. Well, I'm holier than she is because I go to Mass more often. Well, I do more prayers than she does. I spend more time in prayer than he does, so I must be holier. We immediately are trying to, in a sense, get a leg up on the other. And that's not humble-hearted. Going through and trying to describe someone in love versus trying to sit there and nitpick everything they have are two very different experiences. If you sit there and try and nitpick your spouse, now don't do this right now, it's going to be a very difficult Mass. If you sit there and try and think of every single fault your spouse has, every single irritating thing that they do, you're going to have a very bad day. And you're probably going to end up with a very bad marriage if that's how you spend all your time in marriage. Now, if you sit there and think of all the blessings that you've received, all their finer points, all their beautiful gifts, you're going to have a very good day. You're going to have a very good day. That's part of that love that is found in humble-heartedness, in that humility that says, I can find the good in others. Now, it also helps us to know the great place, our place in the great scheme. In the great, wonderful, wide universe, it's very easy to imagine that our place is irreplaceable. And of course it is. In your family, you cannot be replaced. In this community, you can't be replaced. But when we look at ourselves in the great scheme of things, the little things we do are wonderful and powerful for the person that we're doing them for. But sometimes we have to have the humility to acknowledge that we don't need great accolades. We don't need someone to tell us we're doing a wonderful job every moment. Second one, blessed are the gentle-hearted. Blessed are the meek. Now, meekness is not necessarily something we value as a culture. But blessed are the gentle-hearted is a better translation, because we've kind of said, no, meek people don't really necessarily fit into our culture. Blessed are the gentle-hearted. What is being gentle with others? When you can delight in people, when you can delight in something someone has done for you, you're practicing gentle-heartedness. Gentle-heartedness always begins with prayer. It always begins with an understanding that we need God to soften our hearts. How many times in the Psalms do we hear, God, take this heart of stone and put a heart of flesh inside of me? We hear it all the time in the Old Testament, especially in the Psalms. Take away this hard-heartedness. The opposite of being gentle-hearted is being hard-hearted. Now, gentleness and having a gentle heart is trying to see the inherent dignity of every single person that you meet. Not seeing, am I more important, am I less important? Are they someone I want to like? Are they someone I want to be around? It's merely acknowledging the inherent dignity in others, that they are beloved children of God. That's the starting point, in a sense, of gentle-heartedness. And that they have an invaluable eternal soul. It's what so often our culture forgets when it thinks about the unborn. They have an immortal, eternal soul that we cannot touch as human beings. We have no right to touch someone's soul. We have no right to touch the life that they have been given. And seeing that dignity changes who we are. If we first see how do we treat others, and then we look at how do we look at others, how do we love them as human beings, not merely as someone that we come in contact with, but someone that is inherently given dignity by God. When you find someone that is truly a gentle-hearted, you find that they do wonderful things, and sometimes it's in the smallest of ways. It's the most simple things that sometimes grab our soul. We're just touched by something that is done with a very gentle heart. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for the will of God, who hunger and thirst for holiness. It follows from that humble-heartedness. When we can recognize the goodness in others, when we can recognize our inherent dignity standing before God, we're going to know that we need to search after holiness. We need to search after the holiness that God calls us to. God's beauty, the immensity and the love of God. When you begin to see that in others, you begin to search for it even more deeply in God. When you can stand, in a sense, almost tremble, not fear like we're afraid of being destroyed, but we kind of tremble before the awesome power of God, then we are hungering and thirsting for God's will. We're hungering and thirsting for holiness. Now, I love this description that humble-heartedness and holiness kind of flow from one another. All these Beatitudes kind of flow from one another. And they flow from something I began to talk about in the last homily about forgiveness. Blessed are the forgiving and the merciful. Forgiveness is a manifestation of compassion and love. It is a physical way that we can be compassionate and love someone by forgiving them, by forgiving their faults. When we look at someone, it goes back to that image of looking at someone in your life and counting all their faults. If you write down all their faults, the whole page of them, you are going to be much less likely to want to forgive them, to set aside mistakes. But forgiveness helps us to manifest. It helps us to show to the world compassion and love. Blessed are the forgiving. It builds, in a sense, the quality of our life. It builds the quality of our relationships. When you are forgiving, your relationship is built up. It's not torn down. When you can forgive others, you can absolutely do kind things for them. You can continue doing good things for them. And you can continue doing good works for others. One of the most powerful characteristics of the Christian life is the service of others. Being forgiving and merciful helps us to see someone who is in need, not just as a child of God, but as a child of God that we can serve, that we can go out of ourselves and do something good for. That's what apostolic work is. Seeing that God has so blessed us. He's so forgiving of us, so merciful to us, that we better do good for others. We better do good for others. It improves really the way that we serve the world around us. You know, the merciful heart, the forgiving heart, is always sensitive to those who are lonely. I love this list of things that we need to be sensitive to. Those who are lonely, those who are helpless, those who are deprived, disadvantaged, ignored, and pushed to the side. That's what being forgiving and merciful does for us. When we seek after that kind of mercy, that kind of forgiveness, it pushes us deeper in our relationship with God. Pushes us deeper in our relationship with the one who has made us. And one of the things we need to remember very clearly is that when we do good things, it should build us up. It shouldn't destroy us. You know, one of the most profound things about the spiritual life is that if you are miserable in your spiritual life, you're doing it wrong. Isn't that incredible? If every day you do some work and you come home and you are absolutely, totally exhausted and disgusted and you can't possibly do another ounce of work, there's something wrong with the way you're doing it or what you're doing. And it's the same in the spiritual life. In the spiritual life, if you finish your day and say, I never ever want to do that again, then God is not somewhere in the middle of that. God should be giving you consolation. The spiritual consolation is what builds us up. Now, it might be that you've had a hard day. It's not that you're exhausted at the end of a day, and that's awful. I'm often exhausted at the end of the day, and I look at the day and I say, what a wonderful day. And I go through all the many things that God has done for me that day, that God has done through me that day. If your actions lead to better trust and better confidence in God, then it is love that is driving you. It can't just be do-gooding. It can't be that I've got to exhaust myself for the kingdom and be miserable. That's not the way the spiritual life works. Blessed are the pure of heart. Blessed are the pure of heart. It is probably the thing that our culture fights against the most. Someone asked me the other day, do you watch TV? I said, yeah, I watch TV. I watch some TV. They said, well, what do you watch? I said, I watch sports. You know, I like to watch the Suns. I occasionally can sit through a baseball game or a little bit of golf or something like that. I said, but I can't stomach most of the TV shows on TV. They simply fill our hearts with so much awful junk. They just fill our hearts with awful things. Purity of heart is, in a sense, the opposite, is completely cleaning our hearts. If we seek after purity of heart, we notice that it's easier to love. It's easier to love someone, and it's easier to love anyone when our heart is pure. We don't have to remember to love them. We don't have to remember the good things if our heart is pure. Our heart is pure, it continually looks for those deep, deep things. Now, I love this description. You know, when you imagine your life, you know, when you think about the things that you do, when you think about all these Beatitudes, you know, and you ask yourself, okay, in my spiritual life, where am I at? And I love this description. He describes, Father Spitzer describes when he was a little boy and he was in catechism. His catechism teacher said, these are the kind of ways, these are the spiritual, this is kind of like spiritual ground floor. This is where you start. If you're in an airplane and the plane starts falling out of the sky, you need to start saying a profound act of contrition, right? I always love it when I'm dressed as a priest and I get on a plane, everybody they make jokes about it. Well, can you give us absolution, Father? I said, well, not so much, not general. I said, But if you're in an airplane and it starts falling out of the sky, then you should say your act of contrition. That's kind of the bottom floor. That's kind of like the basis of spirituality. But then again, you might not want to wait until the plane is falling out of the sky before you say an act of contrition. You might want to say one every day. You might want to just practice with an act of contrition. Better yet, you might want to not just limit yourselves to those prayers, but try and imitate the heart of Christ. That's like going from ground zero. Yeah, I know my act of contrition, and if I'm in a really bad place, I'm going to say it. That's not exactly that's the starting point. That's not exactly the depth of spirituality we want to have. The depth of spirituality is every day examine ourselves and then begin to say, does what I do in my life imitate the heart of Jesus Christ? We want to have a profound pillar in our life, imitate the heart of Jesus Christ. That's what the Beatitudes are all about. That's why the blessings are so powerful of the Beatitudes. Imitate the heart of Jesus Christ. And your spiritual life will be deeper. Amen? Amen.